Well, the last thing I'll say about Chase Claypool is he did not move the needle for me. This wasn't a signing where I said, yes, we are set now.
Sure.
The Super Bowl is back on now that the Bills have Chase Claypool. But it did make me realize something. And I thought this is very interesting. So I saw that the Bills signed Chase Claypool, and I'm like, he's pretty big, right? And I looked it up, 6'4, 238. And I was like, that's weird. I feel like we've seen that size before. Maybe not the 238 pounds, but at least a 6'4. So then I looked into it, and here's what I tweeted. I said, I know the Bills signed Curtis Samuel, but there seems to be a type of receiver that they've gone after so far this offseason. So they first signed Matt Collins, who's listed. Now, these are all on the Bills website. So the Bills have him listed at 6'4, 221 pounds. Then they drafted Keon Coleman, 6'4, 215 pounds. And then they signed Chase Claypool, 6'4, 238 pounds. And they still have Justin Shorter, who is 6'4, 223 pounds. So then I was thinking, you know what? We talked about this a little bit last week when Izzy and Anthony were on the show. And now I really want to talk about it because considering that the Bills haven't gone after that Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Tyler Lockett, fill in the blank. Based on this roster right now, I think that this is a Bills, specifically Joe Brady, saying, you know what? I want to continue to do what I did at the end of last year and what we did well. And that's how we were able to rip off 5 straight wins. We won that first playoff game, and we were finishing on a high note. I know the season didn't end on a high note, but the way they played from November to December into January, and that was where they went on these long sustaining drives. They got James Cook more involved. The offensive line was paving the way, and they started to use some of their players to their advantage. Someone like Ty Johnson could be a perfect example for this, where he had a specific role on this team. And I'm looking at all these wide receivers and their sizes. And one of the things about Keon Coleman that stood out from his draft profile was that all the scouts raved about his physicality and how not only can he make the tough contested catch and he's a big body receiver, but he is a willing run blocker and he does it well. And I was like, well, wait a sec. If you got Matt Collins, who is also described as a run blocker, he can play special teams. Now you have Chase Claypool. Then it clicked. I was like, I think this is Joe Brady saying, I want to continue to do what we did and maybe not be a first team, because I think if you have Josh Allen as your quarterback, you still want to utilize his arm, his cannon to your advantage. But I think that we are seeing a philosophical shift from where the last couple of years, Ken Dorsey just wanted to throw it all over teams. And it was literally just vertical deep shots, Allen to Diggs, Allen to Diggs. Now I think Joe Brady is trying to shift this, maybe with McDermott's tutelage, and saying, you know what? Let's go on these longer drives. Let's get the run game going. That's why they drafted Ray Davis, maybe to complement James Cook. They want that big bruising back. They re-signed Ty Johnson. They're going to go 12 personnel again with the 2 tight ends. They re-signed Quentin Morris. So until I see a big wide receiver trade, I think this is what we're looking at for the 2024 Bills offense.
Yeah, and I mean, one more final name that you could have added to the graphics was Shavers as well, an undrafted free agent that has now been talked about as potentially another guy that could compete here with them, that has a chance, and mainly because maybe he fits that mold. But yes, they're looking for the 12 sets, the 12 personnel sets. When you're rolling out with Knox and Kincaid, the offense was better. Like, you say what you want about Knox, the offense was better with them both on the field. Like, they passed better out of 12 personnel. They actually run better out of 11. But they pass better out of 12, and it's been very successful for him. Hence why, you didn't see as much production for Davis and Diggs down the stretch. Khalil Shakir was getting open. They were utilizing 12. They were running the ball. They were in a pretty good situation. So to me, you have 2 good tight ends. Like, look, their tight end room is tops of the NFL. It's like close to the top of the NFL. Like, the combination is really good. Knox still hasn't gotten paid that much money from that extension. He keeps taking cuts. He keeps pushing out money. He hasn't really made a ton. So it's not like he's been overpaid yet. Finally, next year, maybe the year, if he doesn't take another cut. But ultimately, at this stage, Knox and Kincaid are very much so a very reasonable duo that can do everything. And Kincaid played a lot in line last year. He played 250 snaps in line. That's way more than I thought he would play in his rookie year. So he's playing tight end. He's very much so still developing in the blocking, and he showed way more from the blocking front than I ever thought he would. So between the two now you got Khalil Shakir, you got the versatility of Samuel. You're going to run 12. You're going to run a lot of blocking schemes in there. You're going to use Hollins in some of those situations. Coleman at times. What can Claypool do? But they're looking for those bigger receivers that can get open in one-on-one coverage, that can burn down the field, or can make, as Brandon Beane likes to say, dogs that have rack. Because there's going to be a lot of situations when they're in 12, and they're just going to be covered by a corner two, and the Bills can make headway that way. Especially if you start to now line up, split from 12 personnel and you line up Kincaid in the slot. You're going to create a matchup nightmare to where you can't cover Kincaid, Shakir, Coleman with the personnel package that you may have on the field. So that's what the philosophical change is. You saw Brady very successful at it, even through the KC game, really struggled a little bit in the fourth quarter of the KC game. But before that, they were cooking on offense. And I don't use that term often. I don't like that term a lot. But they were a really good Chiefs defense. They were in good shape, scoring in the 20s on them early-ish on in that game in the third quarter, early in the third. So they were doing everything right in the first playoff game. They played really well down the stretch. But cooking, I think a biggest addition to this offense with Keon Coleman, obviously, and Curtis Samuel is going to be Ray Davis. I think his ability to catch out of the backfield, 7 touchdowns. He's one of the best receiving backs in college football with turning them into touchdowns. He's just got that quick step, that stutter action you're looking for. He just reminds me of a productive player, a guy that's going to be beneficial in an offense. And I think the Bills really upgraded the juice from that running back room. And I think he's going to be more of a competitive player than we think. So I think, someone that I'm looking for in this whole thing is Ray Davis and how he's going to add to this offense. And I think that he's going to be a really nice piece after his biggest comp, Kevin, just put it into comparisons purposes. DeAndre Swift is who he almost directly compares to out of his height, weight, speed.
Well, that's a good comp. Now, here's what I'll say about this, because again, I think this is what the Bills are doing. And now, even if they do go acquire another big name wide receiver and it's that speedy or shifty guy, I think this is still their plan of attack. Because think about it this way. If you do get that run game going and James Cook is just slicing his way through the hole, Ray Davis is barreling his way through and plowing his way up there, you're going to get the linebackers and the defensive backs to suck in and say, wow, this guy is really a threat. Actually, all of their running backs are a threat. We need to come up and play them. And even if they don't hand the ball off, they have guys like KJ Hamler and Curtis Samuel who they could just dump it off to underneath, and they could use their speed and shiftiness to take it to the house. So you get the linebackers and some of the defensive backs to want to come up, and that's when you use Josh Allen's arm to your advantage, and that's when you can slice up the defense, and he can really air it out, because you get those defensive backs and the linebackers to suck in, that's when you take the top off. And I think it was the opposite with Ken Dorsey, where he wanted to take the top off, but they were just sitting back because they knew what Ken Dorsey wanted to do. So that's why I like Joe Brady, because he's more well-balanced. And he says, look, I think that the proper way to run the offense is, yeah, we're going to pass the ball a lot because we have Josh Allen, but we have to be able to run situationally. We have to be able to run at certain times. And then once you get the defense to really keep an eye on your running backs, that's when you throw it up the seam to Kincaid. That's when you go to Coleman, and that'll make the separation issues look better, because Keon Coleman is going to find himself wide open because the defense is trying to stop James Cook.
And I think, once again, like the ability to run and pass out of 12, to earlier points that I've seen here, to be able to pass out of 12 has been successful for them as well. So the ability to do that has been wildly successful. And here we go. I just wanted to bring up his spider chart. And as we see, it's a direct 95.8% comparison. You see this almost the same exact spider chart from DeAndre Swift, from Ray Davis. Will he be on third down? Yes. Will he be catching touchdowns? I believe so. It's going to be a nice addition to this offense. The Bills handpicked to the philosophical changes. They handpicked the running back, and I think that's why you see the Bills in embedded yesterday basically saying that Ray Davis is the pick in the fourth round. They were after a running back in that round. A little bit of a run happened right before the Bills selected in the fourth round of the draft, to where they were thinking that they needed to make that move at that point, and even willing to risk Van Granger. But it's really interesting to say Granger will be our next pick. It's funny that he lasted that long. Like, I don't know how the Bills do that. That they could take Ray Davis at 128 And then at 141, I mean, it wasn't that long into the fifth round, but still 13 picks later, they felt good enough that Van Pran Granger would be there. And the Bills obviously selected Ray Davis over favorites Braylon Allen and Audric Estime, two names we talked about here on this show, two names that many thought would be the picks at that specific spot. I thought it was fairly obvious he may go there. Even Isaiah Davis went a little bit later into the fifth round. So, we thought, Kamani Vidal, another guy I liked, early into the sixth. So we had 4 or 5 names there that were kind of more at the top of my board. I didn't know that once again, I didn't think Ray Davis would be there like Van Pran Granger would be there in late into the fourth. And the Bills not having a third during the pre-draft process, I just didn't believe that would be the case. That, him and Jalen Wright would be iffy if they'd be there. And Jalen Wright was a name that went off to the Miami Dolphins at pick 120. We will never know if he was the one he was the only other name the Bills could have liked more than Ray Davis. They did a lot of work with him. But other than that, I mean, the Bills felt like they were in pretty good position at that stage to select what they deemed to be, obviously could have been Jonathan Brooks or Trey Benson, but two guys that went in the top 70 picks. Obviously Blake Corum was there as well, Marshawn Lloyd, a couple names, but no one beside that, no one went off the board until Jalen Wright. So we will never know if Jalen Wright would have been the pick. But the Bills did obviously pick him over Guriendo, too, a nice-looking candidate there in the combine, who had a really good combine. But was it Jalen Wright that may have been the name? But I do think with the name starting to go, Bucky Irving and Will Shipley going off the board, the Bills definitely felt like at that spot he was their running back, and it was good to see them be able to select him over Guriendo, Braylon Allen, Audric Estime. So I feel pretty comfortable that he was the guy toward the top of their targets list, and they have a plan for him. And he's going to get a ton of carries.
Yeah, and, a couple of reasons why I think that the Bills are undergoing this philosophical change is, I kind of talked about a little bit with the Ken Dorsey versus Joe Brady comparison here, but I think it's more of an NFL full-scale comparison because I think a lot of defenses are starting to play back, right? Because once you got these big rocket arms and Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Burrow, Herbert, anyone pretty much, they've been playing too high cover shell. So now I think that we're starting to see a shift where teams are going to say, okay, you're going to play back on us because we have a rocket arm for a quarterback. Okay, we're just going to build up our running game and we're going to get you guys to suck in and you're going to have to defend our running game. And as soon as you guys come in, bam, that's when we're going to take the top off. So I think we might see this philosophical change in the whole league where teams are starting to pick up on it. So maybe Buffalo's ahead of the curve here. Would you agree with that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think I absolutely believe that to be true. I'm still interested to see what the Bills would have done with that third round pick. I don't know how realistic it would have been, but had McMillan, who went to Tampa, you mentioned him earlier, or Roman Wilson, we haven't mentioned, going to Pittsburgh. They were falling a little bit, like late into the third. Had they been there for those picks, those would have been the two that really. I don't know if the Bills would have liked Burton, also went in round 3, as well as earlier in the round. You had Malachi Corley go. I don't think that was realistic for him to be there. He was always like a second round draft choice. But Roman Wilson, as he started to fall a little bit into pick 84, and McMillan falling to 92, would the Bills have added to that philosophical difference? But ultimately, they felt like they had it there. Josh Allen said, Keon Coleman was his guy from the start, and that bigger body. But yes, I do agree to your original point that is how they're looking that they want to play. Because if they're in 12 and they throw very well out of 12, they want guys that can get rack and that can take the top off of a defense in a one-on-one situation. Because quite frankly, let's even use Claypool. Like he's not going to be double covered. There's going to be situations to where he's probably on the defense's worst corner. And if he can win that matchup, you already have to worry about Shakir. You have to worry about Coleman maybe on the other side, and you have to worry about Kincaid and Knox also in 12 personnel. Depending on who's on the field at the time, like especially if they trot out Chase Claypool, you never know. It could work out, and that I do believe is maybe their philosophical change as we head into 2024.
And another reason why they might want to do this is because I don't know if I buy into this, but it's definitely a valid point that it keeps the defense off the field longer. Because look what happened to the Bills' defense last year. Decimated with injuries. And the longer they're out there, the more susceptible they are to getting injured. Now, I know the Bills got younger. They got rid of a lot of those older guys and bigger contracts, heightened by Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. So I think Cole Bishop and Mike Edwards and the new defensive backfield is definitely going to be better in that aspect. But the Bills might look at this and say, regardless of the ages of these players, we don't want to risk them getting hurt. And I know you could say that offensive players could get hurt because I think last year was an anomaly with how almost perfect the offense was with not getting injured. And then the defense just got decimated week after week. So the Bills might look at that and say, okay, you know what? We're going to go on these long sustaining drives, try to keep our defense as healthy as possible. And we think that being a well-balanced offense is going to be the best recipe for success. And maybe this is what McDermott meant all these years when he said complementary football, where again, this doesn't mean that they're going to be a run-first team. It's just running in the right situations in order to throw the defense off enough to be able to use that to your advantage on the passing attack.
Yeah, for sure. And I got to always change with the times. And he's always referenced making adapting and changing. And I think they've made a philosophical difference on the O-line. They're spending assets. They're getting younger. Cedric Van Pran Granger, like we've already talked about earlier in the show with their philosophical kind of differences here. You had Aaron Cromer in the draft room, and the Bills basically saying, here you go. Like, you get 3 moldable players in Grable, Van Pran Granger, and Clayton. What the Bills are going to get a roster exemption for him. You know, they're obviously hoping to take the 7th round Philly approach, where they've developed a, good looking starting left tackle from this program in the 7th round in 2018, Jordan Mailata. So the Bills are hoping that they can maybe do the same behind Spencer Brown. But yeah, just the youth of it with Osiris Torrance. David Edwards is pretty young himself. Connor McGovern's not that old. Spencer Brown is still in his first rookie contract. Lyle Collins may be the only, and obviously Deion Dawkins. But beside that, you're going to roster Vandemark, Alec Anderson, Van Pran Granger, some form of final roster spot. Obviously going to Lyle Collins, but they could roster Keaton Bills, an undrafted free agent, Grable, Travis Clayton. You're going to have a very young Bills offensive line, which is going to be nice. And now the receiving core is getting younger, obviously with Curtis Samuel being the oldest guy, but Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir and Justin Shorter is fairly young unit as well. So, and then Dalton Kincaid leading that, and James Cook still on his rookie deal, and Ray Davis. It's a young offense, Kevin. Isn't that at least all on rookie deals? Isn't that kind of exciting for once?
Yeah, and I'm wondering if they're doing this with the intent of saying Joe Brady is our offensive coordinator. Now, obviously, he got interviewed by the Atlanta Falcons during the playoffs last year. I hate that rule, but that's a conversation for a different day. So, I mean, if they have a successful year, Joe Brady might be taking jobs elsewhere after this season. But I think this is a Bill saying Joe Brady is our offensive coordinator right now, and we're trying to build our offense based on what suits his play calling best. So maybe that's why they didn't trade up for Brian Thomas. As much as I wanted Brian Thomas, maybe Joe Brady didn't. And maybe if Ken Dorsey was here, maybe they would have traded up for Brian Thomas, because maybe Dorsey would have played a role in saying, hey, Beane, this guy fits my play calling to the best of my abilities. So I think there are a lot of different avenues where, we're sitting there on draft night and we're saying, why did you trade out of the first round? Why did you trade with Kansas City? Why didn't you take Worthy? Why didn't you take Leggett? And then they say the cliche, well, he was on our board for a reason. We like the value. They looked into all the essentials. And I think that's some of the stuff that we're not privy to is, how does he actually fit into the offense? What did he say during his interviews? How does he test? What are his mentals like? How much is he willing to learn? And how much, which is, I think, one of the biggest factors, how well will he relate to Joe Brady?